The sound cut out first. That's the part I remember most clearly. The band still playing, glasses still clinking somewhere behind me, and total silence where the slap should have been. I watched my sister's hand connect with my daughter's cheek, watched the white veil tremble, watched 200 people freeze in their chairs like someone had pressed pause on the whole reception. And I waited. I actually waited for my parents to stand up. My father looked away. Just looked away, like he'd seen a stranger trip on the sidewalk. My mother caught my eye across the room, and I thought, finally, someone is going to fix this. Instead, she mouthed 4 words at me, calm as a grocery list. Go calm your sister down, not go help your daughter. Not go check on the bride crying into her bouquet. My sister. My legs were already moving before my mind agreed to it, but something in me had already stopped walking toward my family. 60 years, and I was only now seeing it clearly. Only now. I need to stop here for a second, because I have to tell you. 5 years ago, I couldn't have said any of this out loud, not to a friend, not to a therapist, not even to myself in the mirror. This isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about the exact moment a mother stops apologizing for taking up space in her own family. If you've ever been the peacekeeper, the one who smooths things over so everyone else stays comfortable, I'd like to know I'm not alone. Drop your city or country below. Let's see how many of us there are. See how many. I grew up in a house where Deborah was sensitive and I was steady. That was the family shorthand, repeated so often it stopped being an observation and started being an assignment. My sister's outbursts were something to be managed. My calm was something to be relied on. Nobody ever asked if I minded the arrangement. I just grew into the shape they'd carved for me. And by the time I was 25, I'd built an actual career out of it. 32 years as a family court mediator, sitting across from people at the worst moments of their lives, teaching myself to read a flinch before it became a shout. I thought that made me the strong one. I didn't yet understand the difference between strength and absorption. Megan was my miracle. 6 years of infertility, 2 losses I still don't talk about, and then her. Loud and furious and perfect, arriving late enough that I'd stopped believing she was coming at all. She grew into a pediatric nurse, the kind who remembers which stuffed animal each child likes best. She is, without exaggeration, the kindest person I have ever known. Her wedding to Sam was supposed to be small, warm, ours. The night before, my mother took Megan's wrist in both hands and clasped on a pearl bracelet, the one passed down to brides in our family for 4 generations. I stood in the doorway and felt something loosen in my chest, some old tension I'd been carrying since Megan was born, wondering if she'd ever really be let in. Finally, I thought, she's being welcomed into the center of this family. I didn't look at Deborah's face when the clasp closed. I wish now that I had. Looking back, the cracks were there for months, and I stepped over every one of them like they were nothing more than sidewalk seams. Deborah started with the engagement. 18 months, she kept saying, like it was a scandal instead of a courtship. Rushed, she called it, to anyone who'd listen. Then there was the business with Ryan, her son. Megan had asked him to be a junior groomsman, a genuine offer, warmly made. Deborah declined on his behalf. 2 weeks later, she was telling our aunt how hurt she was that Ryan had been left out of the wedding party. I heard about it second-hand and thought, that doesn't add up. Then I filed it away, the way I filed away everything. 3 days before the wedding, my mother pulled me aside in her kitchen. Voice dropped low like we were discussing a diagnosis. Just make sure Deborah feels included, she said. You know how she gets. I nodded. I always nodded. Nodding was the family currency, and I'd spent my whole life paying it. Then the rehearsal dinner. Deborah leaned across the table, smiling that soft, concerned smile she does so well, and asked Megan, sweetly, brightly, in front of 22 people, if Sam knew about the college incident. There was no incident. Megan blinked, laughed a confused little laugh, said, "What incident, Aunt Deb?" Someone changed the subject. The breadbasket got passed around. The moment folded itself back into the evening like it had never happened at all. Something in my chest went cold and still. I told myself, the way I'd told myself for 30 years, that Deborah was just awkward, just sensitive, just Deborah. I had a lot of practice not seeing things clearly. I was about to run out of it. The ceremony was beautiful. I mean that plainly. No irony in it. Megan walked down that aisle, and I forgot for a few minutes that I had ever worried about anything in my life. By the time the reception was underway, I was at my table with a glass of wine I hadn't touched, watching my daughter sway with her new husband, thinking I had never seen her look more certain of anything. Then Deborah stood up with the champagne flute in her hand, and I felt that old cold feeling again before I understood why. The toast started fine. Sweet even. Praise for Megan, for Sam, for the beauty of new beginnings. And then the pivot, delivered with a smile. Of course, some of us weren't invited to help plan this day. A ripple went through the room. Megan tried to laugh it off, said something gentle, reached out to touch her aunt's arm. The same instinct she'd have with a frightened child in her ward. Deborah's voice climbed. I was already rising from my chair when I saw it. Her hand connected with my daughter's face before I'd even registered she'd raised it. The sound of it, sharp, flat, final, and then nothing. 80 people, and nothing. No document, no paper trail, no ambiguity to argue over later. Just an act, witnessed in full daylight by an entire wedding. I reached Megan and pulled her into me, felt her shaking, felt the heat already rising on her cheek. I looked to my parents for backup the way I had my whole life, some reflex too old to override. My father was studying his napkin like it held instructions. My mother caught my eye and tilted her head toward Deborah. Go on then. Handle her. As if my daughter's face wasn't still red from being struck. They'd seen. Of course they'd seen. They had always seen. And they had always decided that Deborah's feelings were the ones that needed protecting. The rest of the night blurred into logistics. Sam's parents forming a quiet wall around Megan, someone's cousin driving Deborah home early, the band awkwardly finishing their set like nothing had happened. I stayed composed. 32 years of court training doesn't switch off just because it's your own daughter's face that's red instead of a stranger's. The call came the next morning. I picked up expecting comfort. My mother's voice was brisk, businesslike. You need to call your sister and apologize for how Megan embarrassed her. I asked what exactly my daughter had done wrong. She knows Deborah is fragile, my mother said. She should have let the toast happen. My hands were shaking. My voice was not. That part still surprises me when I think back on it. I told her I needed time to think, and I hung up before she could answer. I sat in my kitchen for a long time, and somewhere in that silence I made a decision that had been 60 years in the making. I would not ask my daughter to apologize for being struck at her own wedding. And I would stop pretending this was the first time my family had chosen Deborah's comfort over someone else's safety. I called Megan first just to hear her voice, steady now, if tired. Then I called Sam's mother, who offered, gently, without me even having to ask, to gather photos other guests had taken. Documentation, she called it, like she already understood what I was only beginning to. For the first time in 60 years, I wasn't looking for the middle. I was looking for the truth. For 2 weeks, I gave them exactly what they were used to. Tired, busy, hard to reach. When my mother pushed, I gave her the vague, worn-out language I'd been handing my family my whole life. I'm just trying to process. She took it as a good sign, the way you'd take a fever finally breaking. Deborah sent an email, long, wounded, artfully composed, about Megan's coldness, about how hurtful it was to be judged for one moment of raw emotion. I didn't reply. I screenshotted it and added it to a folder that was growing heavier by the day, because while I was being quiet, I was also being thorough. I went back through years of texts, old holiday photos, half-remembered comments I'd once excused. I called a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years and asked her carefully about something I'd only ever heard whispered. Deborah, a Thanksgiving a decade ago, striking her own mother-in-law across the face. Hushed up, smoothed over, filed under. Deborah gets like that. I sat with that folder open on my kitchen table one night and understood fully for the first time what I actually was to this family. Not the strong one, the absorber, the one who took the impact so it never reached anyone else. And my daughter had just been handed the job. I requested a family meeting. Framed it gently. Just to clear the air, I told my mother, and I could hear the relief flood into her voice. My father agreed without much comment, which was its own kind of comment. Deborah, when she heard, said sweetly that she was willing to forgive Megan. None of them knew what I'd built in that folder. None of them knew I wasn't coming to that table to fold. They were about to find out I wasn't the shock absorber anymore. They gathered in my parents' living room the way they always had. Deborah in the good chair, my mother already primed with a speech about moving forward as a family. I let her get halfway into it before I spoke. Then I laid it out, piece by piece, the way I'd laid out custody timelines for strangers 1,000 times. What happened at the reception, factually, without adjectives. I read Deborah's email aloud, her careful framing of herself as the wounded party. I set the photo of Megan's face on the coffee table, the mark still visible, red against her skin, and let it sit there while nobody spoke. I repeated my mother's words back to her, word for word, from that morning phone call. Then I named the cousin, the Thanksgiving no one talked about. I didn't raise my voice once. I asked my parents a single question. How many times have you asked the person Deborah hurt to apologize to her? My father said nothing. He looked at the carpet like it might answer for him. My mother's eyes filled, but not for Megan. I could see that clearly now. Could see it was the airing itself that wounded her, not the years of silence that made it necessary. "This is so hurtful," she said, "to bring all this up like this." Deborah stood so fast her chair scraped the floor. "You've always been jealous of me," she said, "jealous of how easily people love me." And for one strange second I almost laughed, because it was such a small, threadbare thing to reach for. I looked at her steadily. "I'm not asking for an apology," I said. "I'm telling you I'm done providing one." The room went silent in a way I recognized, the same silence that had followed the slap itself. Something had finally been said out loud that couldn't be unsaid, and none of them yet understood what that meant for what came next. The aftermath was quiet, but it was permanent, which surprised me more than the shouting ever could have. I stopped going to the holidays. My parents called it breaking up the family, that same tired phrase, and I told them, calmly, that the family broke the moment they chose silence over my daughter's safety. I didn't do that. I just finally said so out loud. Deborah cycled through her usual weather patterns, rage first, then a soft, performed concern, then a message threatening to tell everyone what kind of person I really am. I didn't answer any of it. There was nothing left to negotiate. Megan, though. Megan exhaled in a way I hadn't seen in years. She told me she'd spent her whole life feeling like she was failing some test with that side of the family, some standard she could never quite meet. Now she understood. The test had never been fair. It had never even been about her. A few aunts reached out in the weeks after, careful and a little ashamed. "We always knew," one of them wrote. "We just didn't want to say anything." I was kind to her. I was also honest. Knowing and staying silent, I told her, was its own choice, made over and over for years. It just happened to be a quieter one than Deborah's. Nobody in that family had ever needed to hit anyone to do damage. Some of them had just done it slowly, with silence, instead. A year has passed now, and Sundays look different. Megan and Sam come for dinner most weeks, and there's a particular kind of quiet in my kitchen that I've come to treasure. No performance in it, no bracing for what might be said next. The pearl bracelet still sits in Megan's jewelry box. She asked me once, hesitant, if she should give it back. I told her, you're allowed to keep the beautiful things, even after you learn the giver was unkind. The pearls never did anything wrong. For 60 years, I believed being the peacekeeper made me strong. I understand now that it can be a cage you build around yourself, brick by brick, so everyone else gets to stay comfortable. There's no peace in a family that only keeps it by sacrificing the same person every time. And when someone hits your child and your family asks what your child did to deserve it, you have your answer. You've always had it. The hardest apology I ever refused to give was the first one that set me free. Thank you for sitting with me through this. If you've ever had to choose your child over your childhood, I'd love to hear it. And if this story meant something to you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it too.